the newsagents.
That culture, what do I mean by that culture? It's a culture that's contained in our customs, in our religion, in our traditions, in our common law, in our architecture, in our music, in our arts, in our educational institutions, in our sporting traditions, and in our constitution. These timeless virtues that have made our country great over the centuries, but of which we are not ashamed. Being British, being patriotic, loving our country, admiring and revering the spirit of the great British people is something that we should unashamedly occupy. And for too long, we've been nervous, we've been reticent, we've been shy about demonstrating that love of our country.
That is the sound of the Conservative Party, licking its wounds, picking itself up off the floor, trying to work out what comes after that calamitous defeat. This is PopCon, a much reduced gathering of popular conservatism in the centre of London this morning.
And that is, of course, the voice of the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who has in effect fired the starting gun of the Conservative Party leadership campaign with a vitriolic attack on the pride flag and the fact that it was flown from the Home Office while she was Home Secretary. Is this really the future of the Conservative Party? Welcome to the newsagents.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And we have lost John to the Tony Blair Institute, where he is currently interviewing our new Health Secretary.
Indeed he is, yes.
So this was, if you like, a tale of two think tanks today.
And what a tale it was. Are you ready, children? Are you ready for this? Gather round, children.
Gather round, children. Sit cross-legged before us.
Doesn't this entice you? A tale of two think tanks.
Who knows how it will end? Well, maybe. Tony Blair is hosting his conference. John Sopel is doing some of the moderating for that today.
The future of Britain.
The future of Britain. And at another Westminster venue was PopCon. This is the Popular Conservatives, the think tank kind of grassroots body, started under Liz Truss with her Tufton Street buddies, with friends like Lord David Frost, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
The right of the party.
The right of the party, the people who think that Rishi was not the answer to anything and that the campaign that we have just seen is directly as a result of the Conservative Party not being
conservative enough.
Right enough.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I went along this morning to the Emmanuel Centre. It's a big hall in Westminster. It can comfortably seat, 1,500 people. And it was very noticeable as soon as you walked in just how many empty benches there were. I'd say in total, probably 150 people in the audience, 180 maybe, all pushed down to the front. The rest of it was sort of cordoned off so that you couldn't sit at the back.
And that's a big contrast to, when we went before the election, their last one, it was absolutely full to the rafters.
Stuffed
Media
to the gills.
everywhere, so much energy about
exactly.
it. Yeah.
And that exactly. So you said that word stuffed. This was the atmosphere in that hall was of the stuffing having been taken out. It just felt limp. It felt a bit damp. There wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. There weren't that many jokes. There were people who were kind of diehards, I guess. You know, they really felt passionately about their party and about trying to understand the lessons and where it had gone wrong.
So who was speaking? So it was Rees-Mogg.
So you had Mark Littlewood kicking things off, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
So Mark Littlewood is the director of the Institute of Economic Affairs, the right
who was, I
think
think,
tank.
sort of benighted or by
associated
Liz Truss.
with the Liz Truss period.
Very much. And then you had David Starkey.
Well-known historian.
Let's leave it at that. And then you had David Frost, and Dan
Not the
Hannan.
late David Frost, the
very current former Brexit secretary.
Yeah.
And I guess each speaker tried to tell us their view, their perception of what had happened on Thursday night and where things had gone wrong. And to a man, I'm just going back, and it was all actually men, apart from Annunziata and Suella Braverman, who spoke to us from Washington. They all basically drew the lesson that the party had failed to lean into its right enough.
And that is surprising as well.
And there you go. Okay, so we clung onto our seats as they delivered this message. I guess the point being that they wanted us to believe that the reform vote was basically part of the Conservative vote that had splintered off, and that, if you counted all the votes together, if you counted Conservative and Reform, they hadn't actually lost that badly. The funniest moment was when they introduced Suella Braverman, who, as you said, was actually speaking from Washington. She'd done a pre-recorded lecture that she delivered, and the speaker made us all sort of clap before she started so that she could then open with the line, "Thank you for such a warm welcome," even though she was on tape. She was not in the room. And she then sort of delivered her sense of what had gone wrong. And one of the lines, we'll let you hear. She talked about, we didn't mention the war, we didn't mention immigration, and that spiralled out of control. Now, I think you and me have probably sat here on enough occasions very much hearing the Conservative Party talk about immigration, in fact, scratching our heads.
Stop the boats is the Prime Minister's
you could argue,
mantra.
I think, very effectively that they hadn't spoken about anything else, that they hadn't spoken about public services, that they hadn't spoken about the cost of living enough, that they hadn't spoken about, any of the areas that people were putting at the top of their lists as major concerns. But no, the takeaway was that they had let the country go to the woke dogs and that this result was entirely predictable.
The Conservative Party today is reassembling in Parliament for the first time. They're going to realise just how small their numbers are, just over 120. They're going to see Keir Starmer at his absolute pomp. And they're going to have that sinking feeling, and we'll see Rishi Sunak in his new role as leader of the opposition today as they elect a new speaker. They're going to have that sinking feeling where their irrelevance really hits home. And of course Rishi Sunak had to assemble or put together a shadow cabinet on Monday night. What's left of them, he doesn't have much choice. And of course,
David Cameron, we should say, has decided that a shadow foreign secretary, very much not for him.
Apparently, David Cameron decided it. Yes, he didn't really fancy being shadow foreign secretary anymore. No, that wasn't. So he's nobly, gallantly handed that over to his former deputy, Andrew Mitchell, who's now going to be shadow foreign secretary for a while. I think there's less travel in being shadow foreign secretary. I think the budget,
somebody else has got the jet.
I think the budget isn't quite as up to what the Foreign Office has.
They don't put the flags out in your name on the buildings anymore, do they?
Not normally for the shadow foreign secretary. No, but this is obviously. The word on everyone's lips, even though we do think this is going to be a longer contest, is who the next leader is going to be, and they're sort of limbering up for that. And Suella Braverman, perhaps uncharacteristically, and the right of the party, are sort of starting this process. And Braverman, you mentioned Emily Braverman being in Washington. I mean, she made a pretty astounding speech last night in Washington, which is setting conservative circles kind of aflame in terms of this is not the start of a contest which is being marked by much tranquility. So she made a speech about the pride flag. And she said this. She said, "We Tory ministers, normally in charge of the system, completely failed. The progress flag or pride flag flew over our buildings as if they were occupied territory. I actually asked as a minister, why is this happening? Who says it had to? I could get no answer, none that would be committed to paper anyway." And she went on to say, "My question, why is this happening, went to 10 Downing Street to the PM's office. That's where the answer failed to come from, because to repeat this point once more, far too many politicians agreed that the progress flag must be flown to show how liberal and conservative we are, while the progress flag says to me one monstrous thing. I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of children in our hospitals." Because, of course, the current Pride Progress flag obviously isn't just related to LGB, it's related to T-bit of trans issues as well. And this has predictably, to start effectively her leadership campaign, talking about her party being a party to the mutilation of children, has astounded, I think, many in conservative circles, at least on the centre and left of the party. And I would say this, that she is burning through. I don't think she has much chance of becoming Tory leader, because I don't think the numbers are there in the Conservative Party in Parliament. But she is destroying any chance she has to get through to the party at large, I would say.
You definitely felt in the room there was an intensity to how she was speaking, which was not reciprocated by those who were listening. There was not, in other words, a lot of love for her. She talked about the smoking ban being a gimmick. She talked about how demoralised the police were. I seem to remember that she was one of those people who demoralised the police by telling them how to police the marchers on the streets. I got the sense that she is going at this in a sort of attack dog manner. There is no subtlety.
That's all she knows.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's working, because I think, to be fair, the one thing that every speaker started with was this sense of having to listen and having to learn and not rushing. And if that is true, if you have people within the losing party, as you should, whichever party that is, if you have people willing to reflect, willing to think about what the electorate has just taught them. Mark Littlewood said something very sensible at the beginning. He said, He said votes are received. They're not owed. Nobody owes you the vote. Your voter hasn't done anything wrong by not voting Conservative this time round. In other words, you need to go out every single time and make sure you earn them. And I think if that is the position of the party, if you're listening to people saying, what did people like and what did people not like, and you're starting from there, that's fine. If you are basically just churning out stuff which, as we've seen before, is meant to generate sort of shock headlines, yeah, it works in, Trump Town, it works with the MAGA crowd. I'm not sure it's going to work on our electorate, even her base.
There's only two responses that parties who are ejected into opposition or lose an election have, right? One is, we lost because we weren't authentically ourselves enough, right? That's one response, and it's usually a losing response. And there's another response is, we need to learn from what the electorate have said and change ourselves accordingly. Which is,
I guess, Starmer being the principal, example of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Of that Corbyn did not work.
Yes, exactly.
For Labour or for this country in 2019. So what has he done? He's gone, right, never again.
And you can see, in terms of the potential Tory leadership candidates, you will be able to divide them along that axis quite easily. And Braverman would probably, and I suspect Cammy Badenoch as well, probably the principal among them who will argue that. And what they will say, and this contest is going to be shaped by this argument, right? Which is that, look, this is really, really simple, right? All we need to do, look at the constituencies. There are so many marginal constituencies. And in many, many cases, if you put the Conservative and Reform vote together, you will overturn the Labour majority, right? You unite the right. Okay, that's fine. But of course, there's two problems with that argument. And it's a simple argument, but there are two problems with it. One, it presupposes that somehow there is a magical person who could get nearly everyone who voted for Reform to vote for you instead. And we know from the polling that that's not the case, that only about a third of Reform voters would be minded to vote Conservative if there were no Reform candidate. There would be lots of Labour-ish voters, for example, older voters, for example, in the north of England, who would never vote Conservative but might vote Reform. That's the problem with that.
And also, if you're voting Reform because you are protesting, right, which fundamentally I think we are still in a place where Reform is not known. We don't know what a Reform, manifesto policy agenda looks like in Parliament. So if you are going to Reform because you are protesting, you're not suddenly going to stop protesting and go to the party of government in the last 14 years.
Indeed so. And then the second problem is, of course, is that in fact, if you're thinking about it's a long way away, but if you're thinking about where the terrain of the next general election is going to be, it's not going to be Conservative versus Reform. It's Conservative versus Labour. So if you look, Conservatives are second to Labour in 219 seats. They're second to the Lib Dems in 64 seats. The danger, of course, in courting only one part of that coalition, i.e. the most socially conservative part of your base, is that you make those first two battlegrounds all the harder and all the more difficult to prosecute.
I mean, exactly. Simply put, I guess the question that we're grappling with now is, why does the party, or why does this section of the party that has clearly lost an election to Labour and a huge number of Lib Dems, think that the answer is to go more to the right? And that was the question that I tried to put to Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm slightly out of breath because I'm sort of rushing up and down the stairs to get him before he leaves. But it was a really curious response. Have a listen. Jacob, why do you think that the lesson of this election is to move further to the right if the electorate has just told you they prefer the parties of the left?
Well, the parties of the right got 11 million votes. I think you're ignoring that. You were waiting patiently.
No, but you haven't answered. Sorry.
I have answered the question. You just didn't like the answer. These two things are different.
So 11 million votes enough?
Sorry, I was about to talk to this lady.
I can't tell you how odd that is, because Jacob Rees-Mogg is never normally short of a moment to spend talking to journalists. I've known Jacob for years. You've got we've all interviewed him a lot. I interviewed him actually just before he lost his seat on Friday morning, the night of the election. There was a real reluctance to engage with me today, which I found just very odd, very curious. And particularly as I was only trying to engage with him on that ideological question. I just want to understand, who are all these people telling you that the Conservative Party, of which you were a part, was not right-wing enough? Because that doesn't seem to be reflected anywhere in what happened overnight, except if you try and understand the position of the Reform vote, which I think is a mixture of things, as we've said. And he had added on, when he said 11 million votes, he was trying to explain that actually if you added in all the Reform votes to the Conservative votes, you got 11 million. Well, two can play at that game, or rather three can play at that game, and you can add the Labour vote, plus the Lib Dem vote, plus the Green vote, until the cows come home, if you just want to play the sort of popular vote share. They lost the election, and they're still, from the sound of it, not engaging with why that might have been.
Indeed. And I think that leave aside the fact that and many Conservatives are saying this, that say Braverman's comments about the Pride Progress flag are extremely distasteful. You can see what they are doing in a sense that they are just retreating into a deeply comfortable intellectual political space for them, because it is easier for the right of the Conservative Party to pretend and to believe and to delude themselves, frankly, that, going back to that split that I said before, that if only they had been more like themselves, then the electorate would have loved them. I don't think the Conservative Party, or elements of the Conservative Party at least, some definitely have, but elements of the Conservative Party have quite appreciated just how bad this result was. And I say that because I think the MRP polls leading up to the election day, polling day,
allowed them to feel relief. Almost.
Indeed so. I mean, we were talking about Canada style, right? And so it's allowed them, it is slightly distracted them from the fact they got 14.5 million votes in 2019. They didn't even get 7 million in this election.
Yeah, they lost, in parliamentary terms, they lost two-thirds of their MPs.
Their worst result for any British political party, not just a Conservative Party, major party in our history, one of the worst in Western European history. They'd never got below 30% of the vote before. They didn't even get 24% of the vote in this election. They are so far behind in so many seats. Labour MPs and newly elected MPs will be able to develop campaigning infrastructure in places they never have before. The Conservative Party organisation in the country is moribund. There is a world. They are one step away from death. Right?
Yeah.
They are one bad choice away from death. And I think the Labour Party understood that in 2020. That's why they went for the safe option of Keir Starmer. The question is whether the Conservative Party understands the depth of their defeat enough yet.
Yes, and if you want to talk in sort of blocks, if you like, the Conservative Party and the Reform will not want to work together in the way that you could argue the Lib Dems do want to work with Labour over questions of, social care and sort of improving access to GPs and all the rest of it. So you've got a very different set of aligning bodies in that. But I think your point too, have they recognised it? I mean, Mark Littlewood's opening words were, it's bad, but it's not Canada bad. Now,
exactly. That's the problem.
Let's not forget, Canada bad left the governing party, or the party that just lost, with 2 seats, right? So you've now got the Conservative Party saying, it's okay, we've got more than 2 seats. That is a bad place to be starting off from. He was saying there's a little bit of maple syrup, it's all going to be a bit sweeter than that. But if that is your metaphor, if you're even using alluding to Canada to say we're not quite there, then something has gone badly wrong.
There was a bit of the Labour Party in 2010 about the way the Conservatives responded to this, which is the Labour Party in 2010, which, by the way, did a huge amount better than the Conservatives Party did last night. They had 262 seats. But because everyone had expected Cameron to win a majority and Labour to be wiped out, it was like, oh, it's okay, it's fine. And, they're going to have a really difficult time governing and we'll be back next time. There is a little bit of that now about the Conservative Party, despite the fact that their defeat is so much worse. And if the right of the Tory party thing as well, and I think it all depends on which of those messages win out. Is it a message in terms of who takes over? Is it the message from a candidate who manages to articulate that, which is to say we are one wrong move away here from death and we need to look outward? Or is it a candidate who actually says we need to retreat to a space that we're comfortable?
Okay.
And it is not necessarily clear, by the way. I mean, everyone always talked about the fact that if there was a wipeout, the right would be ascendant in Parliament. That isn't actually clear.
I think the opposite is true.
Yeah, there are more centre-left of the One Nation Tory MPs left in Parliament there are of the right. So, in terms of what goes through to the membership, that could be they tend to pick the candidate who's most right.
Well,
but the
it won't
MPs
surprise you that everyone here is very keen to hold on to the power of the grassroots members getting their say, because they realise that that's how they might find themselves back in power again. But if you look at the makeup of Parliament now, it is early days, and obviously the one thing that everyone agrees on is not to rush this process. There are more people from the centre of the party that look like that they would have a better chance of holding party together right now.
Well, in the coming weeks and months, the kind of power brokers of the Conservative Party are going to be absolutely central. The people who are working behind the scenes, who are very influential within the party apparatus. One of those people is Lord Michael Spencer. He used to be the treasurer of the Conservative Party, long-time Conservative Party donor, and he's going to be speaking to us next. Well, we're joined now by Lord Michael Spencer, who's treasurer of the Conservative Party from 2006 to 10. He's also now chairman of the Centre for Policy Studies, which is a very influential centre-right think tank. Lord Spencer, thank you for joining us.
Well, a pleasure.
This is a pretty bleak period for the Conservative Party, isn't it? Self-evidently. It is the worst result in its history. Arguably the worst result, well, actually, not even arguably. It is the worst result that any main political party has ever had in this country.
Yes.
What do you attribute it to?
It has been an absolute drubbing, and there's no point in trying to gloss it otherwise. It's down to several issues. I mean, of course, several issues, I think, substantially around more about our competence or incompetence of the Conservative Party in the period post-2019. 2019, of course, we won a remarkable election victory.
It's an astonishing turnaround.
An astonishing turnaround. And the beginning of that disaster was really, it started with Partygate and that whole crisis during COVID. And that really, I think, shook the nation to see that at the centre of our government was really quite dysfunctional. And that was followed, obviously, by the brief but inglorious Liz Truss period in office, which was a disaster. I mean, actually, I think the damage it inflicted on the economy was limited because of the brevity of her tenure. But nevertheless, as a symbol of the incompetence of the Tories, that was pretty rabid.
And Sunak, how much blame do you think Sunak should take? I mean, I know you donated a not inconsiderable amount of money, I think, to his campaign back in May, 250,000. Do you think you got value for money for that £250,000 investment?
I think I'll pass on that question if you don't mind. I think it was the position that Sunak was in when he took over. The chances of his winning the next election were substantially odds against. He had inherited a terrible deck of cards, if you can put it that way.
But he played them badly, didn't he, at times? I mean, we saw what happened with D-Day, Gamblegate.
The campaign, sadly, was woeful. I mean, woeful from beginning to end. I mean, woeful in terms of the planning to be outside Downing Street and flooded with rain, allowing those people to interfere with his broadcast, the announcement not long afterwards that they were proposing to reintroduce national service, an extraordinary announcement, and followed up with various other disasters, including the early departure from D-Day, which was, I think, the final coup de grace, if there was one in the campaign.
You've been involved in the Conservative Party in one form or another for a long time, particularly during its peak at various times, in its heyday, when it was an election-winning machine. Could you believe how unprofessional at times the party machinery and organisation was and seemed to be?
The answer is no. It was woefully incompetent, and I think I think it's premature to rush into trying to make bold statements about every part of it, but there are some serious issues about the organisational competence of the Conservatives, the decisions about the advisors and the people who are put in to various positions, not least of which, for example, the allocation of seats around the country in a hurry, and how that was handled. And yes, it was a chaotic and incompetent campaign from beginning to end.
And what do you think should happen now? I mean, there's the immediate question, which is preoccupying what's left of the Conservative Parliamentary Party and the upper echelons of the Conservative Party, about the length of time that the leadership contest should go on for. Some people arguing for a shorter contest, some people saying it should include the party conference, go up towards even Christmas. What's your personal view about that?
I think we're very advised to have a very rapid leadership contest. I think the extent of the defeat has unsurprisingly bruised the party very badly and left it in some degree of shock. I think we are well best served by spending a bit of time to choose our next leader, in a not dissimilar fashion perhaps than when Michael Howard lost in 2005 and had an extended leadership campaign, and Cameron, of course, came through that as the next leader of the Conservative Party, and I think overall a very competent leader, actually. We need to spend up some more time on this leadership campaign as well, at the very least up until the party conference at the end of September.
You think Rishi Sunak should stick around until that time? Yes. I think he could and he should, and I by the way, he is a capable man, although he has obviously had some big lapses of judgment, particularly over the campaign itself. So I think he can do a night watchman's job between now and
the party conference.
What do you think of the argument that is being put forward by some on the right of the Conservative Party, including some who've lost their seats, but also some who've remained, including the former Home Secretary, Sopel Braverman, who are arguing that the reason the Conservative Party lost is because they were, in their view, insufficiently conservative in office?
I do subscribe that the party has been less conservative than it could have been or ought to have been, but I don't think that is the principal reason.
In what direction do you think it was insufficiently conservative?
We never really, I think, have made the arguments recently of what our philosophy is. What is it? Why should you be voting Conservative? What are we really doing about immigration? The answer was a pretty fair question. And why had we allowed legal immigration, let alone illegal immigration, to reach 750,000 the previous year? What are we doing to grow our economy? Where is the entrepreneurship? What are we doing as a nation to really grow our economy? What are we doing to improve the productivity of the state sector? As you know, public sector productivity has been negative for 15 years now, which is clearly unsustainable. You can't have negative productivity when the public sector is over 40% of the economy.
It isn't just on economics that some of the voices from the right of the party have been arguing that the party was insufficiently conservative. They're talking about social issues as well, cultural conservatism, right? So like Sopel Braverman making a speech in America in the last 24 hours, bemoaning the fact that, for example, the Pride flag or the Progress flag was being flown above her department while she was Home Secretary. I mean, she said, "The Progress flag says one monstrous thing to me, that I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of children in our hospitals." What kind of message do you think that sends out to the public, that this is what a potential Conservative leadership candidate is talking about?
I find that very inappropriate, frankly.
And do you think it rules her out, making comments like that from being Conservative leader?
I'm not going to get drawn now into comments on individual candidates for the leadership of the party, but I wouldn't agree with language like that, no.
It would worry you, disturbs you?
I would say so, yes.
Let's talk about the economy. Because as I say, very wealthy man, businessman, you know a thing or two about how the economy works. In the first couple of days of this government, we've obviously seen a flurry of announcements on the economy, about planning reform in particular and so on, house building. Do you welcome that?
Yes, I do. I think it's an issue the Conservatives shied away from. And this country's needed planning reform for a long period of time. I mean, there's a certain contradiction when you are allowing 750,000 immigrants to come into this country and yet not allowing the planning to provide the housing to accommodate them. And I think this is something the Conservatives, broadly speaking, should support Labour on. I mean, let us hope they go ahead and do it. By the way, there's a big difference in politics and running the nation of what you say and what you do. But planning reform has been needed for a long time.
Do you think that the Conservative Party is? I mean, you've been involved in fundraising for the party. You've given the party a lot of money. It's going to be difficult, isn't it, organisationally, to raise money when you are so marginal to British politics as they're going to be for the coming years? It's going to be very difficult for them organisationally to raise money, isn't it?
In the short run, it's not going to be easy, but I don't think the party is or will be marginal to the future of the UK at all. I actually believe the exact opposite. The Conservative Party is the official opposition. It needs to be an effective opposition. I think despite all the wonderful early rhetoric we've heard from Labour about we're going to grow the economy faster than the G7, we're going to build 300,000 houses, we're going to improve the national... all the great claims they've made, let's see how many of those actually work.
Will you keep giving money to the Conservative Party?
I'm not going to announce any donations.
No, but in theory,
but broadly,
in principle,
I'm still a Conservative. I mean,
yes.
I am still a Conservative, and I am, I hope I can play my own part in the next months, years, in rebuilding our Conservative Party to a credible force again that wins elections. I'm chairman of the Centre for Policy Studies, which you mentioned earlier, and the Centre for Policy Studies is very strongly committed to how we can work with the Conservative Party generally to rebuild ourselves to a position of credibility, reliability, to be a future government.
Lord Spencer, I don't want to be personal, but there is an element. It's one of the reasons that the Conservative Party began to struggle in recent years. And I'm not talking about your appointment in this case, I'm just talking in general. But there was a whiff of corruption about the Conservative Party, right? In the sense everyone talked about COVID contracts, cronies ending up in the House of Lords. I mean, virtually every Conservative Party treasurer, many of whom donated money to the Conservative Party, ended up in the House of Lords while the Conservative Party was in power. That looks terrible to people, doesn't it?
Well, all I can say is let's wait and see who Labour bring into the House of Lords.
But that's not good enough, is it? Saying, well, Labour will be just the same.
No, I don't. And by the way, in fairness, I don't agree with you at all about people who've run fundraising for the party, which I did for 3 years. It's nearly a full-time job. You obviously don't get paid for it. You're expected to make a contribution to the party yourself financially.
Yeah, but that's up to you.
Well,
you shouldn't get a seat in the. But why should you get a seat in the legislature for life as a result of it?
Then, why should trade unionists become members?
Maybe they shouldn't, but I'm just asking you.
I think overall the people who put in their legwork for a party, put in a huge amount of work for a political party, from time to time they should be in the House of Lords. I mean, after all, you're not going to appoint people.
But I'm just saying, sure, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm sure you make a great contribution to the House, but you can understand how it might look that every Conservative treasurer, or nearly every Conservative treasurer, many of whom have donated money to the party, ends up in the legislature for life.
I mean, let's just add this up. You're probably talking about 5 people in the past 20 years.
I think it's more than
well,
that. Well,
if it is, it's not many more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not many more. I know. I mean, heavens, I was one of them, for heaven's sake. So it's not many more. And if you think in the past 20 years how many peers have been made by Labour and Tories and others, I mean, I wouldn't say it's an irrelevant number, but it's not a significant number.
Future of the party?
It's premature. I'm not going to get drawn now on which of the candidates I'm going to get behind. I think we need to, frankly, have a little bit of time out to gather our thoughts and ideas a bit after all, a drubbing only a few days ago. Get our thoughts together. See who's going to run the 22 committee, and spend the next few months really listening to what the leadership contenders have got to say about where they want to take the party, how they want to lead it, and then make our decision then. So I don't want to get premature in making any forecasts now.
And there's been a lot of speculation, including from some of the potential leaders, about whether they might invite or be at least satisfied with Nigel Farage, leader of Reform, coming into the party. How would you feel about that? Do you think he should be invited into the party or allowed into the party?
I strongly don't agree with that, actually. By happenstance, I've known Farage for many years. We worked together in the same firm in the city 40 years ago. And he has obviously been a very effective politician in this last election. Mishandled, I think, by the Conservative Party in the past in not understanding why he had achieved the appeal that he has done. But I don't think we should take Farage into the party.
Why not?
Because I think he is a populist. And I think his terms for joining the party would be very demanding. But most importantly, I don't believe Farage represents what a proper, good, well-composed Conservative Party should look like.
He's not a Conservative.
I don't think he is.
Lord Spencer, Michael Spencer, thanks so much for joining us on the News Agents.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Right, well, it's crunch time for the Conservative Party here. It is also increasingly, it feels like crunch time for the Democratic Party in the United States. Big week for President Biden. He'll be hosting other NATO leaders in Washington later in the week, including Keir Starmer on his first big foray into the world stage. But ever since that catastrophic debate performance a week or so ago, things just have seemed to get worse and worse for Biden, with more and more Democrats, a trickle so far, but more and more Democrats either publicly and certainly privately expressing their doubt as to whether or not he should be the candidate, whether he is fit enough to be the candidate in November's election. And it descended into the absurdity last night of a White House press conference with his spokesperson, basically getting into a row with reporters because the White House press corps felt that the White House over a long period had not been straight either about the president's condition or in particular about a question which had emerged in the last couple of days about whether or not a doctor who specialises in Parkinson's disease, who has repeatedly, according to White House entry and exit logs, visited the White House in recent weeks and months, whether that is related directly to the president and his health. Here's the clip.
It's about a Parkinson's expert who's come to visit the White House almost a dozen times over the last year or so, including at least one meeting with the president's physician. Could you state, very clearly, yes or no, was that expert here to participate in anything surrounding the care of the President of the United States?
So let me just say a couple of things. We have had a comprehensive, and I just want to take another step back, comprehensive physical examination. The president has had that. We've given a comprehensive report. We've shared that the past 3 years. Just to give you a quote from that, from the report most recently in February, an extremely detailed neurological exam was again reassuring in that there were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebellar or other central neurological disorder, such as a stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis. And quote,
That's a very basic, direct question.
wait, hold on, wait a second. Wait.
It doesn't actually sound any better when she spells it out. But the point is that doctor, that specialist, had made 8 trips to the White House. We should explain that the doctor doesn't just see the president. There are other sort of military veterans who come under the doctor's purview. There are other members of the White House and the Biden family as well. Still, it is starting tongues wagging again at a time when it is becoming increasingly febrile. I was told by one House Democrat that the next 48 hours are key, that the House and Senate Democrats are returning to session, and there is an all-caucus meeting scheduled for the House Democrats tomorrow morning, and basically we will know by Thursday night or Friday if something's going to change. In a funny way, Keir Starmer and the other NATO leaders are saving Biden right now. For the next 3 days, he can look statesmanlike, he can do the sort of grand, great USA welcome, and he is centre stage of all those world leaders. But after that, and just before the Republicans and Donald Trump head to their convention in Milwaukee, we will know whether there are enough voices, and critically enough close voices to Biden, telling him that the most decent thing that he could do for democracy would be to step down. And this is hanging in the balance.
It is, and he's got a press conference, a rare televised press conference later in the week, and of course lots of press-related events with NATO leaders. So all it's going to take is one meltdown. It's one really bad question, one freeze, whatever it is. It feels like we're talking earlier about. I mean, all it's going to take is one big mistake, and it feels like that dam will burst.
Many of you will have heard or seen the George Stephanopoulos interview from last Friday with ABC, where the critical question seems to be from the reporter: what happens if Trump gets in? What will you say to yourself if Trump gets in November? And Biden's answer is, well, I'll say I did my best. As if somehow he's kind of running a 3-legged race in a school sports day, and you get the participation trophy no matter what else happens. And I think that is the point that has spooked most people. They don't just want a guy who's
That was my sports day strategy, to be fair.
You just hung around a snooker table from what I remember.
That's true.
I mean, there was something very amazing and very square.
I was bloody good at it.
Very good. Well, maybe he is taking a leaf out of the Lewis Goodall sportsmanship
Doing a Lewis Goodall strategy here.
Strategy. I mean, in parenthesis, the other weird thing about Biden, which nobody seems to be talking about, is that he has been, from what I can see, Botoxed up to the eyeballs.
I think he's a lot of stuff up to the eyeballs.
Yeah, but this is making his whole face look very, very rigid and slightly
very rigid all over.
Yeah, it is not a good look. And actually, I think somebody close to him has to soften it up a bit. Give
take
him
the Botox out.
Take the Botox out. Give him some lines. Make him
put him in the sun for a day. Wheel him into the sun.
Otherwise, he sort of ends up looking too shocked, too horrified the whole time, and that is not helping to sort of quell people who think he's in a constant state of surprise.
I mean, the nightmare is that the problem for the Democrats is that, they keep saying this is what the race is about: Trump's unfitness for office. And it's like, you have managed to conspire, accidentally, unintentionally, whatever, to create a set of circumstances in which the conversation is about their candidate's fitness for office. And their whole pitch, as it was in 2020, is like, we're the guys, and we're the administration of order rather than chaos and integrity. And all of this calls into question all of that, because they now look completely disorderly, as we were hearing in that clip. And there is a fundamental question about integrity, which is now potentially, if they don't handle this right or get control of this, it's not just going to be about Biden's integrity and about his administration's integrity in terms of what they've told the public about his health, but it could be the wider Democratic Party as well. And that the Democrats' brand, which has hitherto been quite strong by comparison to Biden, is dragged down by Biden too. So it feels like the next few days are not just absolutely crucial for Biden's future, but for the election as well in terms of the Dems.
Goodall, you love a sweepstake.
I do.
By Sunday.
Yes.
Is there going to be a new person at the top of the ticket?
Not at the top of the ticket, maybe, but I wouldn't be surprised if Biden's gone. I'm willing to say that I think he might be gone by Sunday. Yeah.
All right, I will bet against you just because that is what we do. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.